When we were little, we often talked about what it is that we might want to have grown up to be. You know, some of us might have wanted to be a teacher or a firefighter or an astronaut or, I don't know, maybe a UX content designer. But what about asking ourselves what we wanted our companies to be? You know, are you building something to pay the bills for you and your co-founder? Are you building something to make an impact, to do something important in the world? Are you building something to make your millions? Are you going to go IPO? It's really important that we ask these questions early on, because if we're not deliberate about the decisions that we make, we might end up building a business that isn't actually quite what we expected it to be. So let me introduce myself. I'm Janna, and I'm a product person at heart. I'm happy to chat with you all. Please connect. Let's chat product or SaaS. That's sort of my specialty. You might know me as one of the founders of Mind the Product, which is the world's largest community of product people. And you also might know me as the founder of ProdPad, which is actually a local company, but we build product management software, so tools to help you build your roadmap, collect your OKRs, collect feedback and ideas, and map it all out together so you know you're building the right stuff. But before all this, about 12 years ago, I was a product person for a company in London. I joined this company as a product person, but within a week, I realized that I wasn't going to be a product person for them. I was going to be a project manager. Right? It was this company that was meant to be like this B2B to C company, and what they were actually doing was taking on some client commitments that were pretty hefty, and they needed somebody to sort of shuffle through the work on their platform to these big companies that they'd sold this work onto. And the thing is, the company hadn't knowingly missold me on the job. They had thought that they were doing the right thing. They just got stuck in this trap that I know is really common. I call it the agency trap. I've seen it a ton of times since then, and I now have the vocabulary to call it out. So I want to help you all spot it and say something about it before you actually end up in this trap yourselves. So really importantly, you don't have to take notes for this slide. For this talk, I've put the slides up here, so feel free to grab them. The link for the slides is going to be on most of the slides as well, so you'll be able to grab them as we go. So yeah, feel free to grab that. I'll have another version of this at the end as well. Now, today's talk is going to be a journey. We're going to talk about the power of product in terms of discovery versus delivery work. And we're also going to talk about the reasons why companies get pulled off track from the goals that they had, those product-led goals that they had. We're also going to talk about some clear signs that your company is veering into this agency mode. And I'm also going to give you some actionable tips on how to get out. So that we're going to be talking about how to structure your team, how to format a roadmap, and how to set your pricing. So, are we ready, Brighton? Yes. All right, let's go. So why is discovery so powerful? I mean, discovery is at the heart of what product teams do. You know, the very nature of it is to cast a wide research net and to hold back from coming up with solutions originally. You're trying to just find out what problems are out there for your customers, for the market. And the product team has a process of essentially guessing and checking to optimize, to find a solution that's cost effective, that's desirable to the market, that's feasible to build, that's valuable to the business. And it's a process that can take years. It's really messy, and there's no guarantee of success. But when it is successful, it can pay off in spades. Now contrast this with how agencies work. You know, agencies, a typical agency, the client enlists the team to tackle a problem that they have defined for you. They come to you with the problem, and you and the team get paid for the work you do on them. Now, as a product person, you should cherish every moment of time you get to spend in discovery mode. This is where the big, juicy problems of the world are found. This is where real value is discovered. Delivery is when you're honing in on that one problem and is really more of a means to the end, right? You have to have delivery. We all have to deliver something because, you know, that's what pays the bills ultimately. But it's not the earth-moving disruptive activity that discovery has the potential to be. You have to have balance. You have to have enough time to discover problems, and you have to have enough time spend enough time delivering on those solutions. But what if this gets thrown off balance? What if you find yourself overcommitted, weighed down by client commitments and delivery projects that mean that you don't get to spend time in discovery? The biggest indicator of your ability to scale is to look at what your business sells. Now, this determines whether you're more of a product company or an agency. So agencies sell their time in exchange for money, right? This usually takes the form of client contracts and projects. And product companies, on the other hand, sell value that they create. They spend time up front creating something. Now, time is the one thing that we can't create more of. It's the ultimate limited resource. And so agency-style businesses can only scale with more human resources and more people providing more of their time to more of their business. Whereas product companies are able to create value kind of out of nothing. Well, not out of nothing, but a much smaller team. They're able to invest time up front into a mix of products or services that can be resold again and again without needing a directly proportionate number of people to scale. And so this is why product companies can scale into such enormous tech giants, and fundamentally why agencies can't. You don't see giant agencies, you see giant tech companies. And there's absolutely no shame in running an agency. It's a brilliant way to make money and to create purpose. Smooth. Solve problems and get paid. Thank you very much. But agencies don't change the world. Product companies do. And if you take a look at the companies storming the charts in the last decade, it's tech companies who invest in scaling the product side of their business. You know, here's a look at the S&P index. You can see how Netflix, Amazon, and Google are outperforming even the best of the best with their product-minded approach. And so many companies aspire to be product companies. You know, product manager hiring is on the up. There's so many articles, there's so many ways you can learn about building a great product company. So we've all set our course to scale, to be product companies. And yet, so many companies go in with this idea of building and scaling a product company, but end up in the same trap that I did. They end up with basically acting like an agency with too many commitments, spending their time on what otherwise should be spent on discovery and not actually getting the chance to scale. So what's going on in here? Well, let's talk about the reasons you'll get pulled off track. First reason, cash is king, right? It's really hard to turn down cash. When you're building a product company, it takes time. It can often take months or years to get any sort of traction, to get payback on the investment that you've done. So it can be really easy to take on just, it's a little bit of custom work to get a bit of cash in the door. It pays the bills, keeps the lights on. No harm in that, right? Or sometimes it's marketing and sales who are trying to convince you that, one more feature will be the thing that wins this client. It's always one more feature, isn't it? We're always one more feature away from the perfect product. Or maybe it's, those big enterprise customers, the ones with the big recognizable logos that are going to make it look really good, and they've got the big deep pockets. If you build something for them now, maybe they'll dump their money on you later. Right? Lots of reasons why companies end up building stuff for these big, giant companies. Or maybe it's just a lack of focus. Sometimes you haven't actually defined what kind of business you are, and so people on your team don't know that they're not supposed to be taking on these commitments, and so they just naturally go and take what looks good. Money looks good. Why not take the money, right? And this one's particularly painful because this is what hurt my business before. When you've got funding, right? You take in a little bit of funding, and essentially what happens is you've set yourself on this trajectory that you're going to do this hockey stick, right up like this. And the expectation is that you're going to invest and you're going to grow. But you might be a day late and a dollar short, right? So essentially, it takes that little bit longer to get to that growth period. And so you're able to either say, well, we're going to have to take in more funding. If anybody's ever had to do a bridge round or a down round, that's really expensive in equity. And so you end up taking in whatever will pay the bills, whatever will fill that gap between funding rounds. But if you do that, it means that you're no longer able to focus on the thing that was going to make you do this. So you end up just constantly doing this. Nearly every startup starts off with great intentions to follow that scientific lean methodology of building, measuring, and learning and iterating until they've solved the most interesting problems. But it all goes out the window in times of stress. Sometimes whatever we need to do to get to the next round actually becomes just selling your time for money. It's really easy to get stuck. Because let's admit it, making money and cashing checks is addictive. I like it, right? Great, let's do it. But every minute of time that a client buys from you to work on their problem, specifically their problem, is time that you can't spend discovering and learning about bigger problems for other clients, for the wider world. So, there's a chance that client actually hands you a problem that you could solve for them and you could resell it cheaply enough that it actually does allow you to do something magically like this. But chances are, I've seen a lot of companies try this, chances are you haven't just magically leapfrogged the whole discovery process. So as someone who's been there, someone who's seen countless companies end up down this path, I can share some signs that your company might be veering off into this territory. So the roadmap is a really telling feature of any company. In a discovery-led roadmap, the roadmap should be focused on the outcomes. It should be a list of problems that you're trying to organize. You're supposed to prioritize at the problem level. In a sales-led organization, the roadmap might look more like this. And this is actually my old product roadmap from that company I was talking about 12 years ago. So the stuff in gray you can essentially see is our discovery-led work. This is what we're building for the wider market. We're trying to find the big, juicy problems to solve. But ultimately, our time was dominated by the stuff in the green strip, right? This is what we called enterprise and partner launches. These are things that we're doing to close specific deals by specific dates. Very importantly, it had to be done on time. Yeah, sure, it got us paid that month, but look what the cost was. For the preceding quarter, we basically had almost no discovery work delivered, whereas our client commitments were just stacking up. And while it looked like the partner work cleared up in the future, we were going to have tons of time in the future to go work on discovery, the reality is that we never actually got back to that stuff. We just ended up constantly taking in new stuff. Our salespeople would walk in with a grin on their face, saying they'd sold something else, and this green strip would get fuller and fuller and fuller, and the gray strip just disintegrated. We never actually did that. Ultimately, we never built half of what we said was in this roadmap. Ultimately, this business failed. A discovery roadmap should look entirely different. It's centered around the business objectives to meet, like it might be revenue or user targets, or it's around the customer problems to solve. The product manager uses the roadmap to prioritize the problems to solve, and make sure that things are prioritized, make sure that they're making the most use of the resources that they have. It's not overrun by client commitments. Now, I know that moving from one of those sales-led roadmaps to something that looked a little bit more like that lean roadmap I said can be quite difficult. So I've actually written a guide on how to ditch the timeline roadmap. So I'll share this with you here if you want to get your hands on it. It also includes, there's a whole page on there about how to convince tricky stakeholders who might be opposed to this, like your sales and marketing team who say, well, you know what, we have to sell this to the clients because they're paying the bills. Or the bosses who say, well, the old way, we were delivering faster. You weren't. It just looked like they were delivering faster. So I've created this guide that you can download here. Feel free to grab it or ask me for the link later and I'll send it to you. So another sure sign that you're veering into agency mode is that you've got a product manager who's acting like a project manager. Anybody ever been in that position? Yeah, I'm sorry. So the project manager's job is to gather requirements and figure out the scope of the project and to guide the project through to completion, right? They're meant to manage the resources and milestones and delivery processes and other constraints along the way. And it's a real job. It's a thing that you do need to have if you're doing lots of projects. Now, I've been hired in this position. I've been in this position, right, where I was like the product manager, the product manager, and I was sat down in front of clients and then discovered as I was sitting in front of the clients that I was meant to be doing project management because I've been told what they had been promised. That's always a really awkward moment. And I basically ended up spending far too much time breathing down the necks of developers, right? I was trying to get estimates. I was trying to get an accurate picture of what we could actually deliver based on what had already been promised. And this is all time that I couldn't spend in discovery mode. This is all time that I couldn't spend figuring out if there are bigger problems to solve. So if you've got a product manager who's actually spending more of their time in project management, it's a sure sign that you're probably acting more like an agency than a product company. And another sign that you're veering into delivery mode is that you've become a feature factory. Anyone familiar with this term? Yeah, all right. It's such an easy one to fall into because it actually starts when you're a young company, right? When you're a young company, you have 0 features. So you build one feature. You're already infinitely better than you were. You build your second feature. Obviously, it's 100% better than it was, right? Each new feature you add is, a big improvement on what you had because you had nothing, 3 weeks ago. Each new thing you launch gets you new downloads, new signups, new press, new whatever it is, right? It feels good. But teams get into this habit of constantly shipping and launching and shipping and launching and not actually really thinking about whether the stuff that they're building is the right stuff, right? But over time, right, when you get to your 100th feature, each new feature begins to weigh you down. It doesn't give you the same boost, and you end up with a Frankenstein of a product. We're addicted to our features. We can't quite quit the habit of building features because the pressures of those around us, right? So it might be sales saying that they can't sell the product without this particular feature. Or it might be your marketing bot saying that you're lacking a feature that the competitor has. They've got this, this pricing checkbox thing that they need to fill out, and you're missing one, so you've got to have it. Or maybe it's your own inner voice saying that you just need this one thing that's going to, jump your numbers into this viral growth. Right? That one thing is going to make you do this. Or that eternal question that you get from your board, your boss, from everyone. When is this coming out? Teams stuck in a feature factory are constantly chasing the next idea and spending a lot of effort getting work out the door, but not a lot of effort making sure that they actually doing the right work in the first place. So some typical patterns to watch for include, having very specific ways of prioritizing the ideas, right? Finding the right idea. These methods tend to be really sensitive to opinions or to changes in the algorithm. A lot of emphasis on moving quickly or getting out the door. Terms like agile cadence or velocity or burn down. Anybody use those terms internally? Yeah. These are delivery metrics that measure your ability to ship fast, but not the ability to ship well or discover the right thing. And what you measure is what you get. So if you've got these measurements, this is what you're going to end up with, is just lots of stuff. And there's very little time granted to validating that past launches were actually the right thing to build in the first place, that they were successful and impactful. The right things were actually shipped. A common habit that I see is to launch experiments, but then to not actually check whether the experiment actually worked. A better approach is to take a step back and prioritize at the problem level, not at the ideal level, not at the individual experiment level. Prioritize the problems to be solved and then tie them back to whether it's solving those problems or not. And this tends to avoid the trouble of getting stuck in those very granular priority systems like stack ranking or weighted scoring. I hate those systems. It instead allows you to, it allows your entire team to focus on company level objectives, like what the high level success looks like, and figuring out the order in which these problems and opportunities need to take place. And it prevents your team from getting distracted by that one feature that a client might ask for, or that shiny object. It keeps them focused on what's actually going to make a difference. So, how do you go about getting out of this pattern? Right, well, first up, it's important to recognize that you have been doing this, right? The first part is to have a conversation, bring it up with your team, acknowledge this, have a tough conversation. If you are the one who is running the business, it might be a tough conversation with yourself and your co-founders, or even just with yourself, and say, you know what, acknowledge, like we've stepped off track. We may have done a few things in the past. We got paid for it. Cool. Hopefully you got paid for it. But you've got to have these tough conversations. If you are the person working for a company doing this, sometimes you've got to influence upwards and speak out, right? Call BS on your bosses. I really, really, really wish I didn't have this vocabulary 12 years ago to speak up to my bosses and say, I think this company's doomed. Like I could see something wasn't right, but I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know the mechanics of the business in this sort of way. But looking back, I was like, oh, if I'd just had this tough conversation, perhaps I could have pointed out that taking in all of these client commitments was meaning we weren't able to build the right things. And, worst case scenario, maybe they would have told me that I was wrong, and maybe they could have enlightened me on what the strategy was. Maybe they had some grand plan and the things that I was building actually did tie in strategically with what we're going to do. And actually the features, they all tied together into something. They were going to be able to sell to this company, then this company, then this company. It was all going to go do this any moment now. I mean, I couldn't see it, but maybe they could. So if you speak up, maybe they'll tell you what's going on, and all of a sudden you're more enlightened. You understand what's going on. Best case scenario, you might actually save the business. And I've literally spoken to people who had this chat with them, and they've gone to their bosses, had this conversation, and got their company out of this habit because they've saved their company from this path. Like, you could literally save your company from doom. One of the things I tell people who are in more junior positions, don't assume the people above you know what they're doing. Honestly, people end up in management positions all the time without necessarily knowing exactly what they're doing. They fall to the same biases and traps that people in junior positions do. And they also like the smell of cash, right? Somebody offers them something that's going to keep the lights on, pay the payroll. Cool, let's take it. Do they realize that the fact that they've taken in funding means that they are going to have to over-exceed, like they can't just pay the bills, they need to do like way more than that to keep going. And when it comes around to them having to get that next round, the investors aren't going to be impressed and they're going to pull the plug and they're all going to go down. Like, they might not know that either. But if you can articulate that to them, you might be the one to save the business. So acknowledge it and have the tough conversation with yourself or with your boss. And as part of that conversation, ask and answer the question, what kind of company do you want to be? Right? I mean, maybe the company actually does want to be an agency. Like, that's cool. There's a cool way to make money. You can do that. Maybe you've realized that you've joined the wrong company. You're like, you hired a product manager. You're not having me do product. Am I ever going to get a chance to do that? Like, that's a good conversation to have. So you know now, as opposed to spending time frustrated with the role. Maybe the company actually does want to go make its millions. And you sort of say, hey, well, we're not going to do it this way because we're never going to discover what's going to make those millions. We're just building what the clients asked us to do. And that's almost certainly not going to make us millions, right? Are we just trying to make impact? Are you happy with just making a little bit of money, but the stuff you're doing is important for other reasons? Like, those are all valid reasons to keep going, but have those conversations and ask this tough question. Like, what kind of company do you want to be? And make sure that there is that alignment in your business. The more that you know, the more that you can adjust things accordingly and be on the right path. And this is the toughest step, right? You might need to rearrange the team. There might need to be downsizing, layoffs. There might need to be changes to the way that you organize things, right? Maybe you've hired a sales team who you've trained up to go get clients to pay you money, but you've decided that actually you want to discover the biggest, juiciest problem to solve and be a product-led company. You might need to remove some people. You might need to just retrain them to be more of discovery agents for you, right? There's different ways you can do this, but sometimes it does require, if you're going to change the path that your company is on, it does require you to change the shape of your team. So it's going to involve changing the shape of the organization. It's going to involve changing the way that you train people. So be ready for this and the impact of the conversations that you have. But it is hugely important that you have these conversations. Just like, if you were 10 years old and you said you wanted to be an astronaut, but you didn't turn up to phys ed class, like you got to put the hours in, you got to do something about it. So if you want to be the product-led company that IPOs and makes you millions, you've got to shape the company to be in that position to do so. And you might have team members who are ingrained in this delivery mindset, right? You might need to retrain them. You might need to get them on board with things. Now, the other thing that you can do here is you can separate your agency work into a separate division space. Now, I'm not talking like big company divisions, but at least like ring fence the work from one to the other. And I wish my company had done this, because maybe it would have been a way to fund some of the work while continuing on in the product space. Right? So give the product team space to do discovery work, but still have a division who is separate, who takes the existing product and is allowed to build on it and, have its own sort of development resources to do its own thing. A lot of companies have a product wing and an agency wing, right? You can copy them. But what happens is when these companies end up sort of trying to do both with the same team, when they start to do the same thing on the same team, it all gets muddled and you end up going, well, are we spending this much time on discovery or this much time on discovery, right? You don't actually know. Remember, time is the most limited resource that you have. If someone's asking for, one of the things that you should be doing here is you should be charging completely differently. So one of the mistakes that I see so many product companies doing is they don't charge for the custom work that they do. Or if they do, they're like, oh, I don't know, like $1,000, $10,000. That sounds all right. But if you think about it, like you should be charging a massive amount for custom work that's diverting you from your discovery work. Put it this way, the company could go get this development work done elsewhere, but could they? Like if you wanted custom work on the app that you've already been building, they would have to build your entire app plus the custom piece that they wanted on top of it. Now, they might be a big company, but they don't have those kind of resources. They're coming to you to do so. Like whatever your price is, probably add a €0 or $2. You'll probably get away with it. Because worst case scenario, like they take their money elsewhere. But more often than not, they're actually happy to pay the experts. You are the experts on how to develop on your platform, and you are quite literally the only development team in the world who can build on it. If they love your platform, you are the one who can say, yeah, you know what? For $100,000, you can also have custom reporting. You can do some really cool stuff with this, but have it as a separate price thing, a separate team. And if you're able to charge accordingly for it, you can afford to have a separate wing that does that. Right? Don't fall into the trap of giving it away and then hoping that you'll make it up in their monthly subscription fees. You won't, right? You've got to charge accordingly if you're going to fall into the trap of doing custom development, and it can be a big win for you if you price accordingly. And finally, decrease your dependence on the cash. So if you are trying to move away from that agency side and you're trying to build up your product-led side, You need to be deliberate about moving away from it. So, if today you determine that 80% is coming from client commitments and 20% from product revenue, well, see if you can set a goal about making it 70-30 and how long to a 50-50 split. Plan out steps in your strategy to get here. Make it deliberate. Work with your team. Make sure your team is on board with this. Make sure your sales team is on board with this. Make sure they know which direction you're going. Look at how you're going to build up your core product so you can take the dependence off this client cash. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen by itself. It'll take you and your team to gather around, admit that there is a dependency on this, and then make a concerted effort to make a plan to get out of it. But remember, the alternative here is you don't actually have to go product. I mean, some of you, I may have insulted all of you, you might be all in agencies. You don't have to go product. Being a product company isn't the only way to make good money. You could be an agency, right? It's a totally respectable way of making money. You can charge a lot for it. Remember, just charge accordingly if you're running an agency, because you're the one who holds the power here. But do it properly by setting pricing and expectations accordingly, right? You can run a really successful agency. I know Brighton's filled with amazing agencies, but you don't have to go product. Just be deliberate about it if you are going to try to go product. Just don't fall prey to this one really common startup killer. It killed a previous startup that I worked for. It's killed other startups that I have seen in the past. Product companies get sucked in by the allure of this agency work because it solves the immediate problem in the short term, but ends up forcing them to take the eye off the ball. And losing focus as a startup is one of the worst things that can happen to you. So start acting now and start moving towards building the type of company that you want to build in the future. Just remember to ask yourself, what kind of company do you want to be when you grow up? As promised, you have access to the slides here. Feel free to grab a shot of that. I'm going to grab a drink while you do that. All right. Feel free to keep your phones out. I know that people like having examples on hand of good product management systems, like when you're talking about a lean roadmap that isn't filled with client commitments. So we've got a sandbox available in ProdPad, free to use. You don't even need to sign in. You can just go to the website and start using it. So jump in there, give it a try. Would love your feedback on it as well. And with that, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to chatting to you all in the Q&A and the breaks later.